The year is 1950, and the parliamentary rules mean that it's time for Britain's first proper Labour government to go to the country and seek re-election for the first time.
In the debate, there's no need for the honourable member for Dewsbury to chunt a ahoy there from a sedentary position. Very eccentric behaviour.
It had been 5 years since Labour came to power, and it had been an active 5 years to say the least. They had carried out a radical programme which had seen the nationalisation of several industries, as well as the railways, and the creation of a national health service. But there were also issues, the main of one of which was the economy. Since the victory over Japan, Labour had been trying to hold off an economic crisis by dismobilising soldiers to get more workers into industry. But even with these measures, the Chancellor Stafford Cripps and the Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin were forced to seek loans from the United States to keep the economy afloat. This meant that going into the election, Labour had a difficult time, but still found some traction, with the campaign focusing on continuation of social programmes and its record generally, and more precisely finishing the nationalisation of the steel industry as well as the continuation of rationing. It's also important to note the party suffered with some pretty serious divisions, as several times throughout the government members of the senior leadership had tried to replace Clement Attlee as leader, with the most notable being Herbert Morrison, the leader of the House, who on the first day of his premiership launched a vote to challenge his leadership of the Labour Party and thus his prime ministership. But this was defeated, and Attlee remained in a strong position by the election. The Conservatives, by this point, had largely recovered from the loss they'd suffered in 1945, with Churchill remaining leader, although by this point he was 75 and in poor health, having suffered a small stroke in 1947. This meant that many of the daily duties of the opposition leader, such as Prime Minister's questions, were in fact carried out by his successor Anthony Eden, at the time Shadow Foreign Secretary. The party had also regained other important ministers in the form of Harold Macmillan, who had re-entered Parliament after losing his seat in the Bromley by-election. This means that going into the campaign, the Conservative Party was in relatively good shape. They had also dispensed with some of their grander ideas and accepted large parts of Labour's programme. This meant that the campaign was mainly fought on the issue of rationing, which the Conservatives wanted to abolish, seeing it as too much of a state infringement on people's liberties. However, due to Labour's view that this was a good way to keep the level of poverty low and continue to create equality, they campaigned on keeping it, making it a defining issue of the election for both parties. Since the effective absorption of the National Liberals into the Conservative Party, the only third party really worth mentioning is the Liberal Party. Well, the only party worth mentioning without a lot of complicated discussions about Northern Ireland. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Since in the last election the party's leader Archibald Sinclair lost his seat, a new leader was elected, that being the left-wing MP Clement Davies, a Welshman from Montgomeryshire, who became leader even though he didn't really want to be, as 6 of the party's 12 remaining MPs were new to Parliament, so he was essentially elected through process of elimination, and really wanted to be a stand-in candidate for Archibald Sinclair until he could return to Parliament in a by-election, but that didn't happen, so he actually ended up leading the party through 3 elections. But he created a new plan to help improve the Liberals' chances in this election, and that was to run enough candidates that if they were all elected, they could form a Liberal government, although that is a very imaginary concept, essentially, as by this point the Liberals were very small. But to fund this, he insured the party with Lloyd's of London against losing 50 deposits, and that'll be important later as, well, you'll see with the results. The country went to the polls on the 23rd of February 1950, and according to predictions it was going to be very close. It's also important to say that since the 1945 election, Parliament had been reorganised, with 625 seats in total and 313 seats needed for a majority of 1 over all other parties. And the results are a Labour majority of 3. Yeah, 3, from a majority of over 70 at the last election. Labour had won a total of 315 seats, losing 78 from 1945, while the Conservatives had won 298 in total, gaining 90 from the last election. This was mainly due to middle-class voters turning away from the Labour Party. However, if you were a Labour MP, you could console yourself with the fact that you weren't in the Liberal Party, as they had slightly increased their national vote share, but actually lost 3 seats from 1945, going down to only 9, and losing a record of 319 deposits, so definitely getting that Lloyd's money. This record for lost deposits would actually hold until 2015 with the collapse of Nick Clegg's coalition. This election left Labour in government, but with such a small majority that actually governing would be difficult. But that shouldn't be a problem, as long as there's not a massive political crisis and the party split in the near future. Oh. So, I'll see you in 1951 for the next election. Bye bye.